Okay, welcome to Psych 232, Theories of Personality. Today we're going over chapter 11. We are starting the cognitive approach. We're going to talk about George Kelley's theory of personality. The cognitive approach means that, it has to do with thinking. So here's a theory that's very different that basically says your personality is due to the way you think. And I believe that George Kelley's theory is, I think, the only one that falls within the cognitive approach that we're going to cover. Okay, the other ones will be different. Okay, so let's get started and talk about George Kelley's cognitive approach. Okay, Kelley's approach to personality. So for George Kelley, it's about what he called personal construct theory. Okay, that's the theory that kind of guides, the way he views personality. Personal construct theory. First of all, you need to know what a construct is. You know what personal means? Personal theory, a theory that you believe in, right? But what is a construct? A construct is what it says there, a person's unique viewpoint and intellectual hypothesis to explain and predict events. A construct, like the word implies, is something that you came up with. It's an idea, right? It's, think of it this way, it's a hypothesis, it's a prediction, okay? So it's something you believe, okay? A belief, but it's more of a prediction. According to George Kelley, we are a bit scientific in the way we apply these constructs, we apply these theories, we test them against reality. If the hypothesis is supported, then we retain the construct, we continue to believe this thing, right? If it's not supported, if the construct is not supported, if the prediction is not supported, we discard it, right? We get rid of it, or maybe we modify it, maybe we change it in some way so that it does fit. So according to Kelley, we all develop these theories, these predictions, these beliefs is what they are. And this is what guides our behavior, our personality, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we behave. And we test these beliefs against reality. So we are kind of like scientists to some extent, okay? An example would be, a student observes that the professor has an inflated sense of self-esteem, right? That the professor is full of himself. And the student hypothesizes that sucking up to the professor might earn him or her a passing grade, right? So basically, if you're nice to the instructor, talk to him, you're nice to him, then he'll be nice to you and he'll give you a passing grade. Maybe despite the fact that you don't work that hard, that's a hypothesis, a prediction, right? When you have a certain kind of professor, right, they tend to be full of themselves. Just suck up to them, kiss their ass, so to speak, and they'll treat you well, they'll pass you, okay? If the construct works, it is retained. If you find that kissing up to the professor, right, earns you a passing grade, maybe a passing grade that you didn't deserve, right? Then you continue to use this construct in similar situations. You continue to believe this, right? If it doesn't work, right, you suck up to the instructor, right? You're nice to him or her, you treat them well, and they still fail you, right? Then this theory, this prediction doesn't work. So maybe you get rid of it, or maybe you modify it. Maybe you modify it, you change it a bit, and you change it so that maybe sucking up, kissing ass, so to speak, only works with male professors, right? It doesn't work with females. So maybe you modify it in that way, okay? And then you test it, right? That's an example, right, of a personal construct. A personal construct is a prediction. And predictions like this is what really drives our behavior, our thinking, the way we feel. It's what explains our personality, according to George Kelley, okay? By the way, when it comes to me, kissing up doesn't work, right? Plenty of students are nice to me. I have a bunch of students, but in the end, you get what you get, okay? Whatever you earn based on the number of points. There's even people who might be in the psych club and who maybe are nice to me there because they're in the psych club and we get along and we get to know each other on a different level. That doesn't mean I'm not going to fail you if you don't do your work, right? I'll still drop you. Okay, I have a student who dismissed too many times. This person also happens to be in the psych club. I dropped her, right? She violated the rules, so she got dropped. I don't know if she's still going to be there at our next meeting, but that's the way I am, okay? It's what you do, right? What determines your grade. So this doesn't work for me. but it might work for some of your other instructors. So maybe you might have a modified version of this theory, this prediction. It would be a personal construct. That's what Kelley called it. More about personal construct theory. There is something known as constructive alternativism, which basically just says that we are free to revise or replace our constructs with alternatives as needed. So yeah, we can change them, we can get rid of them, we can come up with new ones as needed, right? As we learn and grow, our beliefs, our thoughts, our predictions probably change, or at least they should, okay? We develop many constructs during our lifetime. During our construct, we will develop many theories, many predictions about how things work, okay? For almost every type of situation, almost every type of person we encounter. We will revise, right, and discard constructs as situations change or as we meet new people. If we don't revise our old constructs, if we don't come up with new ones, revise them, change them, modify them, discard some that don't work, if we are inflexible, we will not be able to cope with new situations, according to George Kelley. If we are so rigid that we continue to believe the same things, even as we learn and grow, then we're not being very smart. We're not being very rational. We will not be able to cope with the situations. We're inflexible. We're very rigid. Things are always changing. Life changes, right? Our experience change. And we need to revise our thinking, our constructs, our theories, our predictions, whatever you want to call them, as we age and grow and as we learn, as we encounter new situations, new people. That's the way it should work. But if you ever heard of people being stuck in their old ways, so to speak, people who continue to believe the same things, even though the world has changed, even though we know better now, what happens to these people? Well, they have problems. They might be very angry or frustrated, or they don't get along with people. They're unhappy. They're holding on to old beliefs that no longer work. Old ways of thinking. The world keeps changing. The one thing you can be sure about is that the world is going to keep changing. And your thinking, your constructs, your predictions must be basically, they must adapt. You must continue to change and revise them and to think about them. So here's the thing. Personal construct theory. This theory is organized around what Kelley called the fundamental postulate, like the most important rule, basically. Okay, and that is that psychological processes are directed to the way we anticipate events. So in other words, our thinking, our constructs, our predictions, right? What they're really there for is to help us predict the future, to help us anticipate things, to determine how we should behave in this situation, how we should handle ourselves with this person, right? It is all about predicting what's going to happen next. That's what it's about. That's the fundamental postulate. The most important rule, you could say. It's all about prediction. And there are 11 corollaries, basically 11 additional rules for organizing our constructs, 11 additional rules that tell us how these constructs work. And this is what Kelley's theory is about. So these rules and how these constructs, these predictions work, how we use them, okay? The first one of these corollaries is called the construction corollary. And it says that some events are similar and that we will predict or anticipate our experience of such an event in the future. And we formulate constructs on the basis of recurring themes. So some events are similar, okay? And we come up with predictions based on these similarities. Okay, that's what that says. So for example, if we like scary movies, we might predict that we will enjoy a new movie that's about monsters. That's the construction corollary, right? Things that are similar, we will develop similar constructs for, okay? That's what that says. Let's keep going. There's also the individual corollary, which says that different people perceive the same event, the same situation in different ways, and can therefore develop different constructs. We each see the world in our own unique way. So different people can look at the same situation and develop a different prediction or apply a different way of thinking. Think about the situation differently, basically. That's what that means. So for instance, family reunions. Parents perceive family reunions as enjoyable and thus form the construct family reunions are great. If you're a grown-up, if you're a parent, right? And you know there's a family reunion coming up, you would predict, right? that I will enjoy this family reunion. I should go. I will enjoy myself if I go. But your son or daughter, people who are younger, might perceive the family reunion as boring and form the construct family reunions are a waste of time. Yes, younger kids will often think differently. And they're likely to predict that if I go to this family reunion, or I'm forced to go to this family reunion, I'm going to be bored, right? I'm going to be there wasting my time. I'm going to be bored. I'm not going to enjoy this. So you can see the same situation, right? Can be interpreted differently, and people can form different constructs about the same situation because everyone sees the world in their own kind of unique way. Now, people can form the same construct, different constructs, but the point is that people are different and they can perceive things differently and therefore come up with different constructs. There's the organization corollary that says that we organize our constructs into patterns, hierarchies, right? According to similarities or different. So these theories, this prediction, we organize them into groups, into patterns. They, some go together into hierarchies. Some are more important than others. Like, for instance, the construct of good, right, might include intelligent as a subordinate construct, right? We might have the, the construct good, right, or the category good, right? And we consider intelligent people to be good people. So intelligent is under the category of good. But if we meet an intelligent person that is mean, that is awful, right, we might rearrange that and place intelligent under the construct bad. So the point is we organize these corollaries and they're in groups and they're organized in a hierarchical way with some things being under others, some things being above others. That's what I mean. There's organization to them, okay? And yeah, for the most part, most people think that intelligent people are good. If someone's intelligent, that usually means that they're a good person. They think and they act reasonably, okay? But yes, it is possible to meet intelligent people who are actually very bad people, okay? But we usually think of intelligent people as very good people. Like, for instance, professors are supposed to be very intelligent. Usually we think of professors as being nice people. But you can meet some mean ones, right? Some that are awful. Even some very well-known scientists, researchers, or whatever it is, there's some very intelligent ones, and most of them are nice, good people. But there are some mean ones. And you may be surprised when you meet someone like this. And I remember when I was a graduate student at USC, and we went to a talk of for a very distinguished person in a certain field of psychology. So there was this event, and graduate students were invited, professors were invited, and you had this big audience, and you had this guy basically make this presentation and talk about his research. And he was a very well-known, right? Very eminent scholar, right? We listened to his research, and yeah, we were impressed by it. He's very smart. Definitely in the top of his field, right? But then when the whole thing was over, there was some informal socializing that went on. When the talk was over and a lot of people left, and it was just a small group of people hanging out, just talking with this person, then we found out that this person was actually an awful person. He was very racist and sexist. He started basically talking bad about Black people. And he started being very sexist, started talking about how, there's a certain student that came in, and a student worker who delivered some snacks for us as we were hanging out. And after she left, he started saying how she should basically get on top of the table and dance for us, because it was mostly guys there. And we found out that this very intelligent, very eminent person, very high status person, was actually very awful, a very bad person. And we reported back to others afterward, other fellow graduate students and others, about this person, like how awful he was and how we were so surprised that he was this way, because we usually think of intelligent people, especially people who are highly intelligent, as being very nice people, very good people, but they can also be very bad. Okay, the dichotomy corollary. Dichotomy corollary says that constructs are bipolar or dichotomous, and they help us anticipate future events correctly. Dichotomy corollary basically says that, constructs have their opposite, and the way we know things is by understanding what the opposite is. So for instance, the construct honest versus dishonest, right, allows us to predict behavior because we need to know what dishonest is to understand honesty. So here, what this means is that we don't really understand something without understanding its opposite. Things are dichotomous. There's two sides to things, right? Do you really know what good is? And your predictions about good, right, are affected by your predictions about bad. You don't know what good is unless you also know what bad is. You don't know what honest is unless you also know what dishonest means. That's what this says, dichotomy corollary. Basically, constructs are bipolar, dichotomous, right? It means that if you say that intelligent people are good, right, that also implies that, the opposite, that people who basically are, it implies also that intelligent people are not bad, because we know that bad is the opposite of good, for instance. Okay, that's the dichotomy corollary. It just basically says that every prediction has the other side. Okay, and we have to know what the opposite so that we understand our prediction. We have, in order to know what happiness means, we have to know what unhappiness is, right? In order to know what smart is, we need to know what dumb is. That's what this says. So our thinking is affected by these dichotomies, these opposites. There is also the choice corollary. The choice corollary says that we are free to choose the alternative for each construct that works best for us, the one that allows us to predict outcomes of anticipated events. Let me explain that, okay? We have a construct, okay? We have a certain prediction, a certain belief. We can choose to go along with that and do something that's predictable because we know it's gonna work. We've used it before. Or we can purposely choose something that's very different, that goes against our thinking, that goes against the construct, to basically have a new outcome or potentially a new situation. So all constructs involve a secure choice and an adventurous choice. The secure choice is where you follow the construct, basically. You have a certain prediction, right? You know it works, so you go along with that prediction, okay? Little risk, little reward, easy to predict the outcome. Like for instance, there's a certain professor you've taken several classes from, and you know that's a good professor. You do well in that professor's classes. So you have the prediction, if I take this professor's class, I will do well, okay? You can make the secure choice and decide to take a class from that professor, but you could purposely make what's called the adventurous choice and choose something different, something that you don't know how it's gonna work out. The adventurous choice involves more risk, more reward, potentially more reward though, and difficult to predict the outcome, right? If you make a different choice, you don't know what's gonna happen. It's more risky, but you could also end up with a reward, right? It's like taking a different class from a different professor. So with this other professor, you know what you're gonna get. You know you're gonna do well. You know how it's gonna be. But maybe you decide to take a chance, right? And take this other professor whom you have not heard of, who you don't know how it's gonna go, and you take a different class from this different professor. It involves risk. You could end up failing. You could end up hating the class, right? You can't predict what's gonna happen. You might do well, or you might not do well. But there's also potentially more reward. You could find another professor that you like a lot, or another subject that you really enjoy. And that is the reward, right? And you would have never gotten that if you wouldn't have taken the adventurous choice. And that's the way it is for all our constructs, according to George Kelley. Whatever our prediction is, whatever our belief, we can go with it, or we can try to choose something different just to see what happens. We can take the adventurous choice. I'll give you another example that's not about taking a class. I go jogging, for instance. I go hiking. I go off into the hills, into the woods, so to speak. And let's say I know my way around a certain path. And I know that if I take a certain path, I know what I'm gonna get. I know that it's not gonna be too strenuous. I know what kind of scenery I'm gonna get, right? And I know that's a good choice. I know I can do it, right? It's not too long, not too short. I'll get plenty of exercise and I'll feel good, right? And I know what I'm gonna get. I can make that secure choice and choose that same path when I go on my hike. But I could also make the adventurous choice. I could choose a different path that I haven't been on before and see what happens. And if I choose that path, I might find that it's very difficult, very strenuous, right? A lot of steep climbs or something like that. And I might not enjoy that. But I might also find, right, maybe nicer scenery, a really enjoyable hike, right? I might find just another path that's also enjoyable, right? Something else, right, that gives me that reward. That's that same kind of thing. Or you can think about it like investing, right? You know about a certain company, you invest in that company, you know that company is going to do well, it's going to survive, right? That's a secure choice. Or you can decide to take a chance and invest money in a startup, in a new company. There's more risk. You could lose all your money, but there's also potentially more reward. The company, right, the stock could explode and you can make tons of money, right? That is something that's true about investing, right? The more risk you take, the more money you can make, but you can also lose it all. Okay. Like the company Tesla, which a lot of you guys have heard about by now, right? Because now it's very well known. There are plenty of people who invested in that company, you know, many years ago, like, you know, 5, 8 years ago, when it was just a little startup and it was very risky because most likely they were going to go bankrupt. But they invested money and now the stock has exploded. And some people have been rewarded for that, for taking that adventurous choice, for taking on more risk. And to tell you the truth, I was one of those people who I had about $25,000 invested in that company, but I didn't get the reward. Here's what happened. My pool needed remodeling, okay? And my son asked me, when are we going to have a pool? And he really wanted the pool. The kids wanted the pool. So I took the money out, okay? I sold my Tesla stock so that I can make this stupid pool. I mean, remodel this pool. And it costs a lot of money. It costs like $25,000, okay? I took the stock out. I took the money out. And what happened after that? The stupid thing exploded. I could have made $250,000 if I would have left my money in there. But it was risky. I could have lost it all too. But in this case, I made the wrong move. I lost out. I could have made a ton of money. But no, instead I used it for a stupid pool that cost me money every month when I could have left it in there and made money. Right? That's what happens. I made the secure choice, right? I used my money for something I know I was going to get, right? I didn't stick with the adventurous choice. I should have. But it involves a lot of risk. And it's the same thing in life, right? You go with the predictable, the tried and true, or you can try something new and you could hit it big. You can have a great outcome, or you can lose it all. The range corollary, another corollary. Basically, it says that our constructs may apply to many situations and people, or to very few. Okay, so constructs have a certain range. They can apply very widely or very specifically. So like the term construct, right? Like loyal. Who is loyal? That may apply to family, friends, spouse, your boss, right? Loyalty in general can apply to a lot of things. There are many ways in which people can be loyal. But for some people, loyal only applies to their spouse because they're talking about that kind of loyalty. So that construct, right, about having a loyal spouse, right, or my spouse is loyal, I know they're not going to cheat on me, right? That is something that for them only applies to that situation, only applies to a romantic situation. So that's what range corollary means, right? Our constructs, basically, our predictions can apply very widely to different things, or they might be specific and only apply to certain things, certain people. That's what that says. The experience corollary. The experience corollary, I said this already, but it's called the experience corollary. It says we continually test our constructs against life experiences to make sure they remain useful. So as we grow and learn and we experience new things, we continue testing our predictions, testing our thinking, our hypotheses. And we test them to see if they still work. If our experiences don't change, our constructs won't either. If our life is always the same, we don't learn new things, then our thinking won't change. But we find usually that the world keeps changing and our experiences keep changing. Constructs that worked when we were 16 may not work when we are 40. When we were 16, things were different. We were different. We had more energy. We were younger. We were probably better looking. We can behave differently. Like for instance, when you're 16 years old, walking up to, let's say another 16-year-old, a good-looking 16-year-old, a good-looking 16-year-old girl, right, and asking her out, that might have worked when you were 16. But now that you're 40, you do that, and you could get your ass thrown in jail, right? because that's a minor. Okay, you see how things that could work when we were young may not work when we're older. Okay, we have to behave ourselves differently. In general, we're usually not as attractive when we're older, even if we're talking about someone who's, let's say, 18 years old. We're going to get shot down for the most part. Like I say, what the hell is wrong with you? You're 40 something years old and you're thinking you have a chance with me and I'm 18 years old. What the hell's wrong with you? That kind of thing. So our thinking has to change. As we change and get older, we have to adjust our predictions, our thinking. Okay, we have to adjust our expectations. Here's an example that has to do with work. Perceiving work as well paid may not matter much when you're old and care more about being recognized. When you're young, you thought differently. When you were young, right? When you're young and you think about a good job, what you are thinking about is a job that pays well. That is what you want when you're young. When you're older and you've been around a while, you realize that that is not everything, that money's not everything. That a job that pays well, but where you get treated really well, really badly, or that's very stressful, may not be worth it. It's gonna kill you, okay? Increases your stress, makes you more likely to get sick and have a heart attack and die, okay? When you're older, you realize that quality of life matters, right? Other things matter, recognition, status. Those things matter too. And they may matter more than money when you are older, because when you're older, hopefully you have more money already, you've saved and maybe you've paid some things off and money's not as important anymore. You care more about other things, quality of life when you're older. For instance, when I was younger, I might have wanted to be, a big shot, maybe some administrator making, a couple of $100,000 a year somewhere, right? And now I'm older, I realize I like my job. I'm not an administrator. It's decent pay, but I have a lot of freedom and I don't have to deal with all those awful things that administrators have to deal with, right? All the politics, I do have to do a little bit of politics, but they deal with more politics, bureaucratic stuff, a lot of nonsense. I hate that stuff, right? But when I was young, I would have thought that a job that pays well and deals with that is actually an okay job. Now I know better, right? As we grow and learn and experience things, right? The experience corollary, right? Our constructs will also grow. Our thinking can change, and it should change. If our experiences don't change, our thinking won't change, however. That's the experience corollary. The modulation corollary says that we modify our constructs as a function of new experience. We can change, adapt our constructs as we grow and learn, right? There are constructs that are permeable and there are constructs that are impermeable. Permeable constructs are constructs that can adapt and can change. Like intelligent can be adapted to include different people as we meet and learn about them, right? As we meet new people, we learn that there's many different kinds of intelligent people. And the construct intelligent can apply to many. But if your construct is impermeable or can't really be modular, can't really be changed, that means it doesn't adapt. As an example, you might always see minorities in the low end of the intelligence scale despite contradictory info. You might continue to believe things that are like stereotypes, for instance. Stereotypes. So most of the successful people you meet, most of the intelligent people you meet are going to be white because, we do live in the US and majority of people in this country are white and they're the majority of successful people. But you will meet people of color who are also intelligent, who are also successful. But if you continue to stereotype them and say, no, they're not smart or whatever it is, then that means your constructs are impermeable, despite the fact that you have basically evidence of something new. You continue to believe the old stuff, that only certain people, are intelligent, right? Because your construct is impermeable. So the modulation corollary says that we can modify our construct with new experiences, right? If our constructs are permeable, then we'll do that. If they're impermeable, then they don't really adapt. And we might find ourselves frustrated because things will keep changing and you'll keep finding that, if your constructs are impermeable and they don't adapt, you'll keep finding that they don't fit very well. And you'll have more problems, more frustration as you encounter situations that don't fit your expectations or your experiences. The fragmentation corollary, this one's interesting. Fragmentation corollary says that we can hold contradictory constructs that coexist within our overall pattern. So we have all these beliefs, these predictions, these hypotheses, and this is what makes up our personality, okay, the way we think. But we can believe things that are contradictory. We can hold constructs that are in opposition to one another. constructs that are inconsistent in one situation may not be consistent in another. So we can hold a construct that works in one situation, but not another, or we can hold constructs that just don't fit with one another. And we may not realize it, that we're kind of being hypocrites. We're all hypocrites, by the way. We all say we believe certain things and don't live up to it. All of us fall short of our ideals or expectations. Here's an example. Maybe you meet someone that you get along with, so he or she fits the friend construct. You meet someone, you get along with them, and you become friends. You consider them your friend. Okay? But during the presidential election, you find out that he or she, basically, supports more the opposing political party. They oppose a political party that you don't like. So now during the presidential election, now he or she fits the enemy construct, right? That's the fragmentation corollary, where basically means you can hold predictions, beliefs that are, or views that are inconsistent. You can like people and be friends with people who you may hate in other circumstances, or you may dislike if you learn other things about them. Or you can also have just inconsistencies, where maybe you say that you believe in like working hard, right? And following the rules and stuff like that, but you're lazy and undisciplined and you don't work hard, right? In that case, you are fragmented. You believe things, but your behavior doesn't show it. Or you believe things that don't really fit. Maybe, for instance, you, for instance, believe in that life is valuable, for instance, right? And we need to protect life and value life. Maybe you believe that, you have that construct, right? But you also believe in killing defenseless, innocent animals. That makes no sense to me. Do you value life or not? Or maybe you value human life, but not other life. To me, that's an inconsistency. And there's plenty of people like that. We are all hypocrites. We're all inconsistent. We're all fragmented. We hold contradictory beliefs that we're often not even aware of until somebody points it out to us. You say you believe this, but you also believe this stuff. That doesn't make any sense. And that's the way we are. We can be inconsistent when we're not aware of our constructs. Or in one situation, it could be we think one way, in another situation, we think a different way, right? That's the fragmentation corollary. We're not always consistent. We're not always that consistent, okay? The commonality corollary says that though our constructs are unique to each of us, we all each have our own constructs, our own patterns, so to speak, our own ways of thinking. And each of us has our own construct, right? Each person has a different pattern of beliefs, okay? That doesn't mean that we can't be similar to other people, though. People from similar groups and cultures may hold similar constructs because they share that culture, okay? People who share certain norms, certain culture may form similar constructs despite different experiences. So I'll give you an example. Two Asian people, right? The one is poor and grew up in China, while the other one is rich and grew up in the US, may both believe in the hard work construct. Why? Because it's a part of their culture. Asian people in general believe in working hard, following the rules, studying hard, working hard. They are very conscientious people, is what the research shows. Even if they grow up in different circumstances, rich versus poor, you'll see that they have very similar beliefs about when it comes to working hard and when it comes to earning something, right? You earn it, right? You work hard, no matter where you start. No excuses that, you're less intelligent, whatever it is, you work hard and that's what determines your success. They believe in things like that, okay? Or I'll give you another example. This example will be about Latinos, right? You can have Latinos that grow up in, different countries, or different socioeconomic class, but they both like spicy food, okay? But because it's a cultural thing. We kind of enjoy spicy food. That's just an example, but it also seems like a stereotype, okay? But that's the commonality corollary. It basically, because we have things in common with other people, with other groups, because of that, we may also hold similar constructs or believe in similar things. Just like two people who are Republicans are going to have some similar beliefs about some things, whereas people who are Democrat, two people who are Democrat are going to have different similar beliefs. That's what that means. When we share certain things in common, we also probably share common thoughts, common predictions, common constructs. The sociality corollary, the last one, number 11, says that we try to understand and predict what others will do and modify our behavior accordingly. We try to understand their constructs to predict their behavior. This one's important. So our personality is made up of constructs, of predictions, of hypotheses. And we all have our predictions, hypotheses. We each have our pattern. We all have our set, so to speak. But in order for us to function in the world, we can't just be aware of our constructs. We also need to try to understand the thinking of other people, try to understand their constructs so that we can predict their behavior and how we're going to get along with them. So an example, when driving, we assume that other people perceive events similar and that they will respond in predictable ways. We assume that the construct green light versus red light is responded to as we do. We assume, right, or we imagine and we believe, we try to predict that other people, when they see a green light, they're also going to believe, okay, I can go now, it's safe to go. Or when it's red, it's not safe to go, I need to stop, right? So we try to understand other people's thoughts, other people's predictions, so that we can interact with them effectively in the world. And that's just the way it is. We need to be aware of what other people are thinking and try to understand what they're thinking so that we can interact with them. That's the sociology corollary. Though our constructs are very individual to each of us, unique to each of us, we have to think about other people's thinking. If we don't, we're going to get into problems. If we continue to basically believe the same things or think the same way, regardless of what other people think, regardless of what other people are doing, we're not going to get along very well with others. We need to try to understand other people and try to get along with them, try to interact effectively with them. We can't just live in this fantasy where everything is just for us and we do just what we want and follow what we believe when it's at odds with other people. We need to try to understand others and try to adapt and navigate that. We can't just live in this fantasy world, okay? We need to be aware of other people's beliefs, that there is a different reality, there's a different world for other people, and we need to try to understand that. We can't just be self-centered, okay? That's the sociality corollary. Let's keep going. That was the theory. It was all about thinking. Thinking is what drives basically the way we behave, the way we think, the way we feel. Our personality is all about thinking, according to Kelley. It's all about our predictions, our hypotheses. We are, to some extent, like scientists, right? We make hypotheses and we test them against reality. So what did Kelley do to assess the people that he studied? Okay, well, he liked to use something known as the interview, which we all know what an interview is. An interview, right? Kelley believed that to understand people's personality, you must understand their constructs, and believe the best way to do so is in an interview. With an interview, you sit down with somebody and you ask them lots of questions and you talk to them a lot. And according to Kelley, that's the best way to understand how somebody thinks. Not so much through a survey where they just answer some questions very quickly. You have to talk to them, interview them, try to understand how they think. That's the best way to understand their personality, is by understanding how they think. In order to do that, you need to spend a lot of time with them in an interview. He also used something called the self-characterization sketch. This is interesting, where a client is told to write a sketch of themselves as if they were the lead actor in a play. You know, so basically write a kind of a script about themselves, about what they should say, how they should behave, what they should think in these situations. It's as if they're in a movie, in a play, and they have to write the script for themselves, right? As it might be written by someone who knew them well, right? It's useful for learning how clients perceive themselves. So when you write a character sketch or you write a script, you know, about someone in a play, and let's say that person is you, right? That reveals a lot about how you think, and it reveals a lot about your constructs, because you're thinking about yourself as you're in a as if you were in a movie or in a play, and you write out the script, what the person says, what the person thinks, how they behave, right? You are basically revealing the constructs. Role construct repertory test was a test that was used to uncover constructs we apply to important people in our lives. It's just a test, right, that we use for important people. Let's keep going. Other things, George Kelley also developed what is called fixed role therapy, a technique that helps a client formulate new constructs and discard old constructs through acting. So there are people who are maladjusted, who have psychological problems. And according to Kelley, these are people who have constructs, beliefs, predictions, hypotheses, whatever you want to call them, that don't work. And because of that, they're frustrated, they're angry, they're depressed, and things are not working out for them. These people have problems because what they believe, what they think, the way they behave themselves just doesn't fit with reality. So they can engage in what's called fixed role therapy, where they have the client, they have the person who is maladjusted, right? Write a character sketch of themselves, write a script for themselves, right? As if they're part of a play. But the therapist then helps them write a new sketch, a new script, right, with more appropriate constructs. The therapist helps them write a new sketch, a new script that they can then try to follow, right, to develop new constructs, develop new ways of thinking. So the client writes their own sketch, and you can see how it doesn't work, the problems it causes, right? And the therapist helps them prepare a new sketch, and the client gets to act this out and try it out, right? To help them think differently by following a new script, so to speak, a new way of thinking. So the client acts out the new character sketch in the therapist's office, and then they also try it out there in the real world in everyday life. The client must act, think, and talk like this new character. And they learn a new character. They learn to think like somebody else because their character, the way they think, their constructs don't work. That's why they have problems. They're maladjusted. And there's plenty of people, by the way, who have problems. Who, if you're frustrated, angry, depressed, miserable, whatever it is, your thoughts, your beliefs, your predictions, your constructs aren't working out. You develop new ways of thinking, according to Kelley. Let's keep going. Research on Kelley's theory. Research on Kelley's theory says that constructs remain stable over time. Our thinking doesn't change too much over time. Our personality doesn't change too much. Okay, so they are somewhat stable. But when we're young, of course, they can really grow and adapt, and we can learn and develop new ones. But once we get to a certain age, once we become adults and we have our personality pretty well developed, our thinking doesn't change too much. And that's not a good thing, by the way, okay? The construct fit system becomes increasingly differentiated and integrated over the lifespan, more complex. As we do get older, we go from children to adolescents to adults. Yes, we learn new things, we have different experiences, and our construct system grows and becomes more complex, more differentiated over time. And it should continue to do this, okay, as we get older. But there's a certain time in which it's we kind of get set in our ways, so to speak, and then it remains stable, okay? A construct system can process more information and functions more in abstract terms over time. As we get older and our thinking improves, our ability to acquire information improves, right? Because children are not very good at learning and acquiring information, and we get better at those things as we grow and as our brain develops. As this happens, our construct system becomes more abstract. At first, our construct system has more to do with things, physical things, and as we get older, it has more to do with ideas and philosophies, right? Our predictions, our beliefs. Spouses that hold constructs are more alike, report greater happiness in their marriage. If your thinking, your predictions, your beliefs are very similar to those of your spouse, you get along better and you're happier. Schizophrenics are unstable and inconsistent in construing other people. Schizophrenics, they're kind of out of touch with reality. Their constructs don't work very well. Their constructs are unstable and inconsistent. They're not very good at figuring other people out or being able to get along with them or interact with them effectively because their constructs are unstable, inconsistent, not really based in reality. That's an example of someone who's maladjusted, whose constructs don't work. Other research on Kelley's theory, this is something very interesting and applies today, especially in the times we're living in. Cognitive complexity. That's a very good thing. It's good to have cognitive complexity. That's a way of thinking, a cognitive style characterized by the ability to perceive differences among people. If you have cognitive complexity, that means that you are complex in your way of thinking. Your thinking can adapt, your constructs can adapt, right? Those that are high in cognitive complexity, who basically they're more likely to see differences, they're more likely to think rationally about things, to see things that other people miss, right? These people who have cognitive complexity are better able to predict others' behavior because they're more likely to treat people individually and more likely to think about people in individual ways rather than in stereotypical ways. People who are stereotypical, by the way, and think that all these people are the same, those are people who have what we call cognitive simplicity, which we'll talk about in a moment. And those people are not very good when it comes to thinking about other people, okay? These people who are cognitive complexity are also more empathetic. They deal better with inconsistency in their construct system. When there are things that are inconsistent, things that don't work out, right? They're better able to deal with that and adapt. They had parents that were less authoritarian. Authoritarian parents are the ones that tell you what to believe, they tell you what to do. They're very mean and strict. They may be very religious or whatever it is, but they're mean and strict and they tell you what to think and they don't let you question them. So people who have more cognitive complexity had parents that are less authoritarian and instead believe in greater autonomy, letting your children explore and play and kind of, have a bit more freedom and develop their own ways of thinking. And they had more diverse childhood experiences. They met different kinds of people, young, old, people of different ethnicities, people who think differently, right? And that's how they develop cognitive complexity because of their experience. They have a lot of varied experiences and they think more complexly about it. They have more complex ways of thinking. They're more intelligent, for instance. Okay, that's one way to put it. They think more complexly. Okay, and they tend to be moderates and liberals. Now, I know some of you may not like that, but there are those who suffer from what we call cognitive simplicity. These are people who tend to think who are very simple in their ways of thinking. They're more likely to stereotype, right? It's a cognitive style characterized by the inability to perceive differences among people. Those people, they're all the same. They're all this way, right? We're good, they're bad, okay? It's related to the outgroup homogeneity effect. The outgroup homogeneity effect basically says that we tend to perceive people who are different than us as relatively the same. There's a lot of variation among our group, but other people, no, they're all the same, right? Those other people who are not like us, they're all like this, right? That's a stereotype. Those high in cognitive simplicity, those that have this more simple ways of thinking, are less able to predict others' behavior. They don't get along. They don't get along as well with others. They're very simplistic in their thinking. They say things like, you're either with us or you're against us. You're either one of us, the good guys, or you're one of the bad guys. And no, the world is not like that. It's not black and white. That's not the way the world is. They're less empathetic. They're less likely to be able to think about what it's like for other people. Difficulty dealing with inconsistency in their construct system. When they meet people who kind of challenge their beliefs, people who don't fit the stereotype, it bothers them, it frustrates them, it angers them. They had parents that were more authoritarian, parents that told them how to think and what to believe, and they weren't allowed to challenge that. Parents granted them less autonomy, less freedom, especially in their thinking. Maybe they were very religious or just very strict. They had less diverse childhood experiences. They grew up around people who were more like them, and they stayed away from people who were different. And they tend to be more conservative. Some of you may not like that, but yes, conservatives are more simplistic in their thinking according to research. They like to keep things a certain way. They are not progressive. They're not liberal. They don't like to challenge the status quo. They want the old ways of doing things. They try to hold on to things even when they become outdated. And this causes problems. And you can see we have a lot of problems in our society because one group wants to move ahead, right? And be more accepting, less prejudice, less racism, and a better, more tolerant society. And another group is holding on to old ways of doing things that don't work, that lead to a bunch of problems. And they don't want to change, right? That's the problem. Being progressive means that you're more liberal, you're more likely to accept new things, right? Gay marriage, right? And treating people, fairly that happen to be different, all that stuff. It's a good thing. But people who are very simple in their thinking, they stereotype more. They tend to want to keep things the same. They don't like to be challenged. They don't like things to change. That's a very bad thing because the world keeps changing and you need to adapt and grow. Okay, if we didn't adapt and grow, if we didn't change our thinking, we would still believe that slavery is okay. We would still believe that women should just stay home and take care of the kids and they shouldn't be educated or have a job. I mean, the further back you go, the more messed up things were as far as how we treated each other. Okay, and yeah, we're still treating each other badly. We need to grow and change, become more tolerant, more accepting of diverse views and We need to be more complex in our thinking and not stereotype people, not hold on to this very simplistic ways of thinking about good versus evil. You know, like this whole war on religion thing, this whole thing about like Muslims and Christians, right? They're opposed to each other. They think they're going to have a war with each other. Like, no, there is none. One is not good. The other one is not evil. Okay. We're all good. We think differently, right? And we may worship differently, but you know, it's not that way at all. It's not black and white. There's a lot of in between. Sure, there's people who are bad, but it's not just good or bad. There's a lot of in between. It's not strictly this or that. That's a simple way of thinking. It's just not the way it is. And that's our last slide, you guys. The world is complex, okay? And will keep changing. You need to adapt and grow. You can't be simple when you're thinking, or you're going to be left behind. You're going to be frustrated and angry. So I'll stop recording now.